Jewish people from all over the United States here, Baruch Hashem, to study this idea of core faith, really, where faith comes from. And it's all based on the discourse. And you can hear me okay over there? And
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure because it's a little bit of a different setting. Okay, you can see me all right? Okay. So we've been discussing the idea of Amunah. We've been talking about the idea of the job of the leader of the Jewish people is to connect us. And this is the verse that we had studied, and you shall command the Jewish people. But in the Hasidic perspective, this was really teaching that you shall connect the Jewish people with the infinite light. And we spoke about how a Raya Mehemna, how he's not just a faithful shepherd, but the shepherd of faith, that he actually, the idea of the leader is to imbue us, inspire us with faith. And even though the Jewish people are considered to be believers, the sons of believers, this is what the expression in the Talmud, nevertheless, sometimes belief can be something that is more superficial. Of course, it's something very deep, but sometimes something can be very deep and very superficial at the same time. The idea of the Raya Mehemna, the shepherd of faith, is that he takes this faith and puts it forth in a way that we can really make it real to ourselves, internalize it. And we spoke about faith coming from two different ways of looking at where this faith comes from. One is, so now let's shift the focus just a little bit. So this is what we did a couple of weeks ago from the Florida class. We spoke about, so where does this internal faith come from? How is it that we have that faith? Where does that come from? And the Rebbe talks about two different models of where that faith comes from. One level of faith comes from what the Rebbe calls from your mazel. What is the mazel? Not to be confused with mazel tov. That's a different topic. Why mazel? Certainly, it's related. We're here for the purposes of this discourse. Let's understand the idea of the mazel is your spiritual. We know that in life, our
Rabbi,
subconscious.
can you please mute everybody? There's a lot of background noise. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Thanks for reminding me. I keep forgetting to do that. Part of my job as a rabbi is I really want to give everyone a voice. So it goes contrary to my nature to mute everybody. But everybody still has their finger on the button. You can unmute if you have something to say. But if your dog has something to say, I don't want to hear it today. Maybe tomorrow. So back to our topic. So we all know that we are motivated by our subconscious. We don't even realize how. We think we're operating with our conscious mind, but the conscious mind has got all these strings attached to the subconscious, right? And we're really making decisions oftentimes based on reasons that we don't even realize. We think we'll give a reason, but that's not the real reason. It's amazing how the subconscious mind works. Well, in Judaism, in Kabbalah, and all Judaism really, but it's explained and elucidated in Kabbalah, we have the various levels of our soul. Without going into all of we're not going to go into what all of these different levels mean. That's a whole other course, but just getting through this discourse, let's just refer to it generally as our spiritual subconscious mind. So when I go to synagogue, I like to pray. I like to be together with the people. I like to observe I like the Kiddush. I like to hear the rabbi's sermon. I like to listen to the Torah reader to hear maybe he's going to make a mistake this week and I can correct him. It's the great joy that Jewish people have in synagogue, is correcting the Torah reader, right? I was in a synagogue in Palm Beach several months ago. My son lives there. And they have a Torah reader who makes no mistakes whatsoever. He takes all the fun out of it. So we have all of these reasons to go to synagogue. But then there's our spiritual subconscious, which is the real reason. Our neshama wants to go. Our divine soul wants to connect with God and is drawing us, and we're making a decision to do something based on something that our conscious mind might not be aware of. And here the Rebbe says that your mazel referring to your spiritual subconscious, it's a particular level of the soul. It's actually referring to the level of chaya, which is a transcendent level of the soul. So your transcendent level of the soul perceives God directly. And because the spiritual subconscious perceives, the conscious mind believes. Interesting how that process works, right? So it's kind of interesting because we have a saying in English, seeing is believing. Seeing is believing. Well, it's kind of a funny thing because seeing is not believing. Seeing is knowing. Belief is when you believe something without seeing it, right? So you say seeing is believing. But going on that idea, really what the Rebbe is describing here is that our spiritual subconscious sees godliness, and therefore our conscious mind believes it. So that's one model of belief, is that the higher level sees it, the lower level believes it. And this, we're going to refer to this as the belief of let's call it the soul level. It's a soul, just one second, the soul level belief. It's the hierarchical belief. But since hierarchical is a hard word to pronounce, we're just going to call it the soul levels. It's belief of the soul levels, right? The higher level of the soul believes, the lower level, meaning our conscious mind, the higher level sees, the lower level, our conscious mind, believes. But then there's going to be a higher level that we discussed in the past. Yes, Mrs. Berger.
How do we explain when your higher level of the soul sees, your conscious mind?
So the question is asked that I brought up in Florida a couple of weeks ago as well, which is, well, once we know plenty of Jewish people that don't believe. So clearly, the inner soul can always be, there can always be an occlusion. There can always be something that separates us from our deeper reality, even on the soul level, that won't allow it to get through, having to do with all different types of factors, many of them having to do with how one is brought up, right? That can, and one's environment and what is being supported, so that the inner truth. So in other words, according to the Kabbalistic belief, the inner truth of every Jewish person does not change. However, many people are unfortunately not connected to that inner belief due to most of the time, circumstances not under their control, due to situations not based on their control. So that's always going to be the inner reality. This is one of the amazing things when you saw how the Lubavitcher Rebbe dealt with anybody that was coming before him. Most of them, of course, were believers, but not all of them. They weren't always believers. And you have videos today and showing, and you see the approach that the Rebbe always had was the Rebbe always had the approach that inside of this person is the belief. And it's a beautiful idea to maintain and understand. That doesn't mean if you have a brother or sister who is an atheist, it doesn't mean that you go to them and say, oh, I know that really you believe. That's not useful, right? That's not effective. That's not helpful. But it's helpful in the way that we deal with somebody, right? By the way, I mean, just by way of analogy, if you have a child and your child is doing something wrong, a parent, most parents, most of the time, are never going to think, oh my goodness, my child is evil, a terrible child, right? They're going to think they really are a good kid. I mean, you have parents whose kids go and do horrific acts, and that's not my kid. My kid is a beautiful, wonderful kid. They know, the parent knows the reality of the child. The parent is right. Unfortunately, the inner reality of that human being has become disconnected from the external reality of that person. But what I'm saying here is that with the Jew, when dealing with the Jewish person, knowing that inside there is an absolute core belief in God that is intact, impregnable. You can't change it. You can't alter it. That's the reality of a Jew. So what can a Jew do that would make it that they would lose their status of as a Jewish person? Nothing is the correct answer, right? There's nothing you can do to change that status. That shows that really, I mean, you'd think that there'd be a way to opt out, There isn't, because this is simply just like you have the physical reality of who and what you are. There's the spiritual reality, and this is defined by this level. But this is just one model of belief, okay? The second model of belief that the Rebbe brings forth, and this is for Marin, this is on page 16. You have both of these, and in the documents that you have in Florida, where do we have this? This is on page 5. Page 5. You have these are, and the whole discourse is really going to be based now on looking at these two different levels. So everything we discussed right now, this first level, that your spiritual subconscious sees it, so your conscious mind believes it. That's only level number 1. There's something far more profound. The Rebbe says the second level to understand where our faith comes from is a subtle difference, but a vast difference. Faith is rooted in the essence of the soul. It's called in Hebrew the etzem haneshama. The essence of the soul is connected with godliness through an essential bond, a connection that does not depend on any external factor whatsoever. Above even the quality of perception that transcends thought. Since this is true of the essence of the soul, even the soul as it exists within the body is connected with godliness by bond of faith. When you're talking about the soul levels, all of the soul levels are about function. You have different levels in order to be able to relate. One thing relates to another. A deeper level relates to a more external level that can ultimately relate to our physical, conscious level. But then there is the core of who we are, the very essence of who we are. We brought this out before with the various analogies of people. Somebody brought up Daniel Pearl, who died, and he said, "I'm a Jew." Right? Or you have other Jewish people who live their life, and at the end of their life, they realize, I am a Jew, right? This is an essential realization. This isn't merely a higher level of your soul sees it, and so a lower level believes it. That has to do with function. This idea is your essence. This is your essence. And in Florida, if someone can remind me, did I give the parenting example last week of the two different types of parents? If anyone can unmute, and I don't see your faces. If anyone can unmute. You recall? I can give it again. If no one speaks up, I'm going to assume. Mordechai, you remember from last week the parenting analogy? I think it's a very good analogy to understand this, to understand these different levels of the soul. So as a parent, what is your job? We'll ask someone from Florida to respond. As a parent, we went through this. We'll go through it again because it's very important for understanding these two different models of faith. Your spiritual subconscious or your essence, okay? So as a parent, what is your job as a parent? We spoke about this. Your job is to raise your child, to make sure your child is a mensch, to make sure that they're safe, to make sure that they're healthy, to make sure that they're educated. And so as a parent, is it your job to make sure that your child develops the habit of brushing their teeth every morning and every evening? Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Right? Is it to make sure that if you are going on a walk with your young child, that the child holds your hand? Yeah. And what happens if the child breaks loose and runs away? Might there be a consequence? Yes. Yes, there'll be a consequence. So consequences, this is all a function of what I call the manager parent, which is very important. We all, as parents, we have a job to do. Or if you're not a parent, you had parents, and your parents had this job of raising you, right? And giving you roles and giving you rules. And rules also are going to imply consequence if the rules are not kept. But then you have what is called the essential parent. The essential parent is that no matter what the child does, the parent will still love this child. That's it, period. And even if the child, as we just bring, a very unfortunate analogy of children going off and doing horrific things, the parents still love their child in most cases. That can also be, there can also be distortions there and problems and difficulties there. But generally, a parent will always love their child. That's an essential bond. So when we're talking about the different levels of the soul, that has to do with our function, our role, our purpose, what we're meant to accomplish, what we're meant to achieve. And we have 613 different rules to help us achieve our purpose in our life. And in order to realize that, those rules are very important. And to realize all of the different levels of our soul. Some of these mitzvot that we're performing are happening on the different levels of our soul. So you can have one level, one mitzvah connected with one level of the soul. The mitzvah of studying Torah, for instance, is connected with neshama. A level of loving God might be connected with the level of chaya. Understanding the oneness of God might be connected with the yechida, which is the singular level of the soul. Every mitzvah is connected to a different aspect of the soul. The 5 different levels of the soul. And these have to do with functionality, with our function and our purpose. What if a Jew is doing no mitzvot whatsoever, and they're going out of their way to break all of the 248 negative mitzvot? Boy, that's a committed Jew, right? To really, you got to work hard to do that. That's like the story with Rabbi Steinsaltz, Olav Shalom. It's a beautiful story. So he was giving a Talmud lecture at Hebrew University. And many of the professors, Adin Steinsaltz, Time Magazine called him a mind of the century, right? As they once in a century kind of a rabbi and his intellectual prowess and his knowledge, amazing man. He also had a sense of humor. A little biting, but it was a sense of humor nevertheless. So people, of course, flocked to him. But there was one particular professor who did not come, and Rabbi Steinsaltz wanted him to come. We wanted to encourage him to come, and he went and met with him and said, "Why don't you come to the Talmud class?" And the professor said, listen, Rabbi, I'm not the kind of Jew that's going to start studying Talmud. I'm the kind of Jew that when it comes Yom Kippur, I eat a ham sandwich. Okay? So how many sins is he committing with eating a ham sandwich on Yom Kippur? So Rabbi Steinsaltz smiled and he said, wonderful, he said to this professor. He said, I celebrate Yom Kippur too, in a different way than you, but we both celebrate Yom Kippur. You celebrate Yom Kippur by going and making sure that you have a ham sandwich. That takes commitment. In Israel, it's not so easy to get ham like in America, right? You can get it. It's basar lavan, white meat, they call it. You can find it. Right? So you celebrate Yom Kippur and I celebrate Yom Kippur. What ended up happening? This professor ended up coming to the classes and ultimately becoming a frum Jew. Right? There you go. Imitation ham. Imitation ham is fine. Right? So what did it all start with? It all started with the Rebbe's perspective of the essence of a Jew. If you're on the level-based understanding, if you're doing that on Yom Kippur, you're not fulfilling the nefesh, you're not fulfilling the ruach, you're not living up to your neshama, you're not doing anything for your chaya, and you are trying to eliminate your yechida. There's nothing of the levels of your soul that remain. So what conversation can a rabbi have with what conversation can there be with a rabbi, with somebody who's eating a ham sandwich on Yom Kippur? It would seem to be a non-starter. But the Rebbe teaches the essence of the soul. The essence of the soul is no matter who and what you are, no matter who and what you do, this is the essence of who you are. And a lot of people don't realize that Rabbi Steinsaltz was a chassid. He was a follower of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now he wrote a book. He wrote a book called My Rebbe. So now everybody knows the cat's out of the bag. But amazing, right? So it starts with not judging somebody, but yet, as someone put on a screen here, you want to nudge them to do something, but in an absolutely non-judgmental way. It's a weird thing about judgment, right? Do you enjoy judging other people? I do. It seems to be so natural that it's not even a question of do I enjoy it or not. It's just natural. It's just kind of our default that we love. But here's another question, because do you like being judged? Right? It's a horrible thing. Everybody loves judging other people. It seems to be like, and especially when you attach religious indignation to your judgment, right? Now you make it holy. Now I'm judging others because I'm holy, right? The Rabbi said, no. The beginning of holiness is realizing the essence of the soul. So this is all just to get a little bit of an understanding of the difference between the levels, and you can have very high levels of the soul, getting close to, so to speak, to the essence, but the essence basically means that no matter what we do, we are connected. And it can be no other way. And it doesn't have to do with our function, with our purpose, with what we are meant to accomplish. It's meant with the definition of who we are. That's the essence of the soul. And I'm just explaining this, elucidating this, because it seems to be a fine line between these two different levels. But this is what I'm explaining, is that it's a very big difference in how you approach your others and how you approach yourself. And we have this every single day. I'll bring one more analogy, then we'll get back into the words of the Rebbe explaining in the discourse, and we'll go further. There's another example of this. So every morning we wake up, and what is in Jewish practice, what's the very first thing that we do when we wake up? We recite I am thankful before you, living and existing King, that you have restored my soul to me faithfully, with great compassion. Great is your faithfulness. The Moda Ani Lefanecha, one of the most beautiful prayers in Judaism. Now, only afterwards is it our practice to go and wash our hands. There's a special hand washing that we do in the morning. And if you're super religious, not super judgmental, but super religious, you put the water next to your bed, so the water is there and ready. So let me ask you, I mean, you already know the answer, but if you were, they brought to you now, okay, we have these two different practices, washing your hands and reciting a prayer. Which one do you think you should do first? What do you say in Miami, in Florida, or Illinois, or St. Louis Park? Anybody else want to call out? What would you think you'd do first? You'd wash your hands.
Wash your hands.
You wash your hands first, and then recite the prayer. That makes sense, especially if it's right there. If you have it right next to your bed, you're ready to go. No. The Code of Jewish Law tells us that we recite the prayer, and then we wash our hands. The previous Rebbe has an amazing teaching on this, which underscores this idea that we're bringing across here. The idea of hand washing is to remove any negative elements. We wash our hands to remove anything negative. I'm not going to get into what that negativity is. One may have touched, well, I will. That's my preface. Whenever I say I'm not going to get into it, that's my preface for getting into it. So a person may have touched a covered part of the body. Spiritually, Kabbalistically, when we are asleep, there's a negative spirit that comes upon us that leaves in the morning, but a residue is left on the fingertips. So it would make most sense to wash away the negative before we start praying to God. But the previous Rebbe explains that the Moda Ani expresses the essential bond, what we're discussing here in the Maimer, the essential bond that we have with God. And thus, there is no negativity in the world that can touch it. There's no negativity in the world that can impact it. The negativity of the world can impact all of the levels of the soul. But what can the negativity never impact? The essence of the soul. And that plays out in the law. First, we recite the prayer which represents our essential bond. And only afterwards do we wash our hands. And this, to me, this is just one of the most remarkable teachings about this essence. And it shows, it actually plays out in halakha, in Jewish law. It's very interesting because there's another explanation for it, by the way, just for full disclosure. Because when you're studying the Torah, there's 4 or 5 or 70 different levels of understanding the Torah. I shared with you the Hasidic perspective. There's the halachic perspective, which is the prayer doesn't mention God's name, and it's specifically designed not to mention God's name so that there's no problem in saying it without washing your hands. But that doesn't answer the question. Okay, you're allowed to say it, but why would you want to? Wouldn't you want to wash your hands first? So this Hasidic explanation answers that question as well. Why specifically we say the prayer, then we specifically say the prayer, then we wash our hands. Okay, so this is all about the essence. Okay, as you notice, I'm outdoors. I'm not sure how the noise is coming, if the noise is coming through on the computer or not. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, but we hear the dog.
You hear the dogs as well, okay.
Uh-huh.
Send someone over to the neighbors. Okay. They're not my dogs. All right. They make this noise just the same. All right. So we started to talk, the Rebbe started to explain that we have this power of Mesirat Nefesh, of self-sacrifice. In other words, self-sacrifice in this discourse, we're not talking about, well, you have to have some sacrifice and we're talking about actual self-sacrifice, which means actually giving up our life. And the power to actually give up our life in the service of God stems from which level? From the essential level. From the level where our higher neshama sees, we might say, okay, but I'd still rather stay alive. From the essential level, basically, the Jewish experience is I cannot exist in a way that would be denying the existence of God. My essential self is bound up with God, so I cannot live a life that's not like that. And that's the Hasidic aphorism that a Jew cannot be sundered from God. Again, we had the disclaimer earlier that yes, we know some people can because they're disconnected from this inner reality. And then the Rebbe starts talking about, getting back to the discourse, just going to go back a little bit. I want to find, we're in section 6. I will share the document here online. And that's going to be here we are. All right, so to explain, so we'll read quickly in part 6, and in Marin, that's going to be on page 17. Part 6 of the Mimer. So to explain the above, the willingness of a Jew to sacrifice his life for his faith stems primarily from the faith rooted in the essence of the soul. But the faith that stems from sight, right, the first level that the mazel perceives it and the conscious level believes it, does not motivate such a commitment. The faith inspired by this perception is very forceful. The Rebbe is explaining the first level, where the impression created by sight is extremely powerful. Nevertheless, since the faith comes from an external factor, the soul's perception, and not connected with the essence of the being, it does not necessitate Mesirat. Basically, you will see a commercial that talks about exercising and the importance of exercising. You saw the commercial. Might that motivate you to start exercising? Maybe, right? And if it does motivate you, since you saw it, you saw the commercial, how long will it motivate you? If it motivates you. A day, 15 minutes, a week, possibly your entire lifetime, but unlikely. Because that's something you saw that touched you. So that's something external from you. You understand? This is the point. One of them is something that your soul sees that's not itself. You understand? This is the distinction that Rabbi is making, very integral. You understand? You're seeing something else, and that something else is having an impact on you, which could be amazing. But it's not necessarily going to bring you to give up your life. You're not going to be a changed person. However, why would he give up his life for his faith? Because faith is the very essence of his being, and therefore it is impossible that he will heaven forbid by God. You know, just by way of analogy, which parent would be willing to give up their life for the children, right? Both parents, right? Almost all parents, right? I mean, in certainly any normal situation, parents are going to be willing to give up their life for the children. Does that have to do with their job of being a manager parent or the essential parent? That's the essential parent, you understand? So that's the difference. There's our function and there's our essence. And many times ideally the point is going to be ultimately that the essential informs the functional. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a functional part. We have to function. Of course, that's 99% of what we do. And ideally, the essential is informing the functional. So the functional, even when we're doing what it is that we're doing it based on the essential. But giving up a life, that's going to come from the essential. Because it cannot be any other way. And based on the above, the Rebbe says, we can explain the statement in the discourse of the previous Rebbe that Moshe functions as a shepherd of faith, that he sustains and nurtures the faith of the Jews. This applies also to the shepherds of faith, the extension of Moshe in every generation, where they strengthen the faith of the Jewish people, inspiring them to self-sacrifice for the sake of the observance of the Torah and the mitzvahs. So who did this? Well, this discourse is based on Mordechai. So Mordechai in his generation was doing it. When it would have made sense for the Jews to abdicate, Mordechai said, no, we have to recommit. And who else encouraged his followers to teach Judaism with self-sacrifice? The previous Rebbe, right, who was giving this discourse at this very moment. He was fulfilling what it was that he was talking about. Just this next paragraph, I'm just going to kind of say it in my own words. So on the one hand, we have this essential faith. Now, other discourses talk about, shall we say, a much more practical idea of imbuing faith that a leader has, and that is, and say a Rebbe, bringing it to the level of the Rebbe, or Moshe, or Mordechai, is that they teach us the information that we need to know to believe. Is belief based on information? Well, in this mimer, we kind of have two different aspects. It seems that the lower level might be, the higher level, it isn't. But sometimes even to get to the deepest level, the essential level, you need some information to find your essence, right? So in some places, it talks about Moshe being connected with the quality of da'at. And da'at is about what we know to be true. It's about knowledge, right? It's information. And you need to know stuff. And Moshe, what was Moshe's last name? Rabbeinu, right? He was Moshe, our teacher. He taught us stuff. He taught us the stuff that we need to know God, right? In contrast, in the Maimer of V'kibel HaYehudim is explained that the shepherd of Israel in every nation strengthens the faith of the Jewish people, motivating them to self-sacrifice. And as explained above, this comes about not through imparting knowledge, but rather by bringing to the fore the connection to God shared by the essence of the soul, a bond that transcends knowledge. So you see, we have a little, it's not a question, but we have a difference. So in some places, it says that the leader teaches us what we need to know. When the previous Rebbe, the revolution that he led, and Mordechai, the revolution that he led, and Moshe Rabbeinu, the revolution that he led, each of them were revolutionaries. Although in Soviet Union, as I said, the previous Rebbe was called a counter-revolutionary, but that's not true. The previous Rebbe was the true revolution, not the Bolshevik revolution. So in each of these revolutions, the real motivating thing is not going to be the information that they teach, but the example that they set, and the passion and being willing to give up your life for this cause. Now, as explained above, this comes about not through imparting knowledge. The comes about not through imparting knowledge, but rather through the connection of the essential soul. So the Rebbe explains here these two different components. The primary activity of a shepherd of faith is to sustain and nurture faith itself. I want to just to clarify this. So is the leader giving us the knowledge or telling us who we are essentially? Well, yes, it's going to be both, but which is the one that really gives us the faith? So now the Rebbe says, the primary activity of the shepherd of faith, in other words, the person who's bringing us to faith, is to sustain and nurture faith itself. That is, to lift our faith above the influences of our revealed powers. The peak of the latter being the soul's perception of godliness. It's not about what you perceive. It's not about what you understand. It's not about what you comprehend. It's about who you are. And to have our faith reflect the essence of the soul. And that's really what we mean by the essence of the soul. This is who we are. In this context, Moshe's achievements in internalizing faith, bringing it within the realm of knowledge and comprehension, is an outgrowth of his effort to sustain and nurture faith itself, to draw down and reveal the dimension of faith that stems from the essence of the soul, as explained above. For the possibility for faith to be internalized and drawn into the realm of knowledge comes from the revelation of the essential bond between God and the essence of the soul. So here the Rebbe adds another component here. The knowledge is never going to impact you internally. You're never going to internalize the knowledge as long as it remains academic. You could become a philosopher. You could become a professor of Hasidic studies at a university, and you have them. Do they believe in God? Not necessarily. Do they believe in the Torah? Not necessarily. So all of this academic information, the way to internalize it is to personalize it. The way to personalize it is to come to the realization that this is who I am. So the Rebbe says that the only way for the faith to be internalized, I shouldn't say the only way. He doesn't say the only way, maybe there are others. We'll leave that open. But the possibility for faith to be internalized and drawn into the realm of knowledge comes from the revelation of the essential bond of the essence of the soul. The essential bond between God and the essence of the soul. Based on the above, it can be explained that in the generation in which actual Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice was required, and people indeed risked and gave up their lives, the shepherds of Israel, the extensions of Moshe, who strengthened the faith of the Jewish people, inspiring them to self-sacrifice, expressed the qualities of a shepherd of faith in this context to a greater extent than did Moshe himself. Wow. But the essence of the expression of the revelation of the dimension of faith, which stems from the essence of the soul, which is inspired by Moshe, and the extension of Moshe in every generation, is an actual self-sacrifice. So the Rebbe is saying quite a thing here. No offense to Moshe. But when we're talking about the power of the connection to the essence of the soul, that is going to be realized primarily through self-sacrifice. Now, the generation that Moshe led was called a Dor Deah, a generation of understanding, of knowledge, of wisdom. They understood, they got it. But they were not asked to sacrifice themselves. There wasn't a self-sacrifice. On the contrary, walk into the sea, and guess what will happen? The sea will split. That was that was what the generation of the desert, right? Of the Jewish people in the desert. Other generations of the Jewish people walked into the sea, and the sea did not split. They walked into fire, and the fire did not extinguish. So it's specifically when there's actual self-sacrifice, that is going to bring out really the truest function of the leader, of bringing out the essence of the soul. By the way, spoiler alert, the Rebbe is going to take this a step further and say that there is a role of the shepherd of faith even beyond that, and that is to express this essence while not giving up on life, which can sometimes be even more difficult. But that'll be in next class. But the point over here is step number one is understanding that when the leader is bringing the Jewish people to self-sacrifice, as did Mordechai, and as did the previous Rebbe, in a sense, their leadership surpassed Moshe. So they were the extension of Moshe, but they, so to speak, outdid Moshe. Why? Because they were bringing out the very essence of the soul, bringing Jews to actual self-sacrifice. And that's why the Medrash says, the Rebbe says here in the next paragraph, the Medrash says that Mordechai in his generation was equivalent to Moshe in his generation. We don't have that. I don't believe we have that with any other leaders. We actually say about Yiftach, we say Yiftach in his generation was like Samuel in his generation. We compare one lower level leader, Yiftach, we compare him to a higher level leader, to Samuel. Yiftach was Jephthah. He was one of the judges in the period of the judges. But no one is compared to Moshe except for Mordechai. Why should Mordechai be compared? Mordechai was, after he was in the exile. The Jews were exiled. The level of prophecy was far lower. What did he actually teach the Jewish people? Not very much. He gave us Purim, but by the way, no Hamantashen recipe. Okay, I'm kidding. He gave us Purim, but what did he teach us? A Hamantashen recipe. All right. So he gave us Purim, but he didn't. So what is the comparison between Mordechai and Moshe? Because Mordechai really embodied this idea of the essential function of the leader to connect us with our faith beyond everything else. Haman has made a decree over us. He wants to kill every Jew. You could opt out of Judaism and not be a Jew. Or you can recommit to Judaism and accept what Hashem has to offer. And he brought tens of thousands of Jewish people back to their recommitment in Judaism in the most difficult time. That is the true expression of the Moshe of the generation. The Rebbe says here, even more so than Moshe. Yes, the Jewish leaders then, I would say, who, yeah, definitely, also. Unfortunately, those the stories of the question was asked in Marin here about the Crusades. And unfortunately, that didn't have a happy ending, so we don't have books about that, and we don't, but there's no question that the Jewish people, going a step further, I mean, the Rebbe said that the Jewish people that perished in the Holocaust, this was also an expression of their essential soul, even though they may not have believed in God. You had, of course, many Jewish people died. Yeah, exactly. So it was even worse, but it was even a more essential. Now there was, I don't know, there wasn't there wasn't so much a leader who was able to save us from that, as we unfortunately, right? These are not the stories with a happy ending, but there's no question that in these times, that was the essential expression of the soul that brought the Jewish people. And even in the Holocaust, where it wasn't the essential expression, because there was no choice in the matter, that was even in a sense, even a deeper essential thing, where you don't have a choice in this matter, because the fact of who you are is the fact of who you are. In the words of Hitler, may his name be erased. You decide you want to convert, too bad. I know who you really are. More than the priests and cardinals of the crusade, Hitler knew the truth of a Jew. And he knew that that was unchangeable, immutable.
Rabbi, how can you justify Hitler was a Jew? Can you explain that to me?
I didn't say he was a Jew.
But he was born Jewish.
He was not born Jewish.
He was not.
Fake news.
Okay.
Yeah, he was not Jewish. Yeah. Yeah, so
Rabbi,
yes.
at the time of Moshe, right as the Jews were getting ready to leave Egypt, the entire Jewish people had self-sacrifice by taking the deity animals of the Egyptians and taking them into their house and publicly telling the Egyptians, we're going to sacrifice your deity. So that's a pretty much, like, in other words, if the Egyptians don't like it, they're going to kill everybody. And that was a tremendous self-sacrifice on behalf of the entire nation.
It's a good point that you bring across. Listen, I certainly don't mean to take anything away. And I want to explain an overarching idea here. And that is, when I'm saying that this generation had it and that generation didn't, it wasn't a lacking in the generation. It had to do with the situation of the time. And every generation has to deal with the reality of the situation of their time. Okay? So even what you're describing here, and I'm not sure who is speaking here.
David.
David. So David is asking that the Jews in Egypt had to bring a lamb in Egypt itself. That was the Egyptian deity. Wasn't that an act of self-sacrifice? And I'm going to argue it was not an act of self-sacrifice. It was difficult. It was a challenge. But that was after 9 plagues, right? They knew it was pretty clear. I mean, it was clear even to most of the Egyptians who was in charge. For the Jewish people, by the way, many of the Jewish people were totally against the idea of redemption altogether. They want to stay. They liked their homes in Egypt, and they actually did not go out. But that's another story. But just to address your point here, it was definitely an act of. It definitely took tremendous effort, but they weren't being called on to give up their life. They weren't being called on to give. There was nobody threatening to give up, to kill them and wipe them out. So, and it wasn't the time for that. And as we said earlier, that, it was a different time. It was a different era. It was a different manifestation of God's will through the Jewish people and what our mandate was. It did not require actual giving up of our life, which is what we always prefer. We always prefer that we don't have to actually give up our life. But if that is what is called for, that actual giving up our life. And like I said, this is all a preface to the ultimate point that the Rabbi is going to be making, is that there's a point beyond that of bringing out the essence of our soul while staying alive. That's going to be the ultimate. So we're going to get to that next time. But we're going to take a break here. Any questions or comments in California, Minnesota, Illinois, or Florida?
Ireland.
Ireland.
Coney Island.
Oh, Coney Island. Sorry, Coney Island. Wonder in Ireland it would be pretty early in the morning there. Okay, Coney Island. All right. Any questions, comments? Please share. Unmute. Let yourself be heard.
Yashikaya.
Buchantia. My pleasure. Say goodbye to everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
I'm looking
Stay
at the
safe, everybody.
you got originally, and you're up to page 6.
I'm reviewing. I'm kind of going over because the stuff is I'm with more explanation. I'm now on page 7. We're now up to part 7, which is on page 7, the bottom of page 7. You know what? I sent out 2 different versions, so I apologize. So if this is from the second version that was sent out, of the Maya.
I'm looking at the one that has Hebrew and English.
No, I'm not. You see, I'm not using that one. I haven't been using that one.
Okay.
I am on is part 7. That one with Hebrew and English has a lot more explanation, which is maybe a little bit different than the explanations that I give. So I decided on a different version that only has the English. And you have received that. If you send me an email to rabbirice@jewishlantern.org, or you can get my email from Rabbi Menachem, I will be happy to send you this version that I'm working from.
You just gave it.
Okay, thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're here
Thank
next
you,
time.
Rabbi.
Here in California, we're not going to have lunch, which is going to be a pastrami sandwich. So, next time, if you guys want, you can all fly out here. All right. Be very well and have
Thank you. You too.
a good rest of the week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
God willing, on Monday.